All right. Well, thanks for logging on to our Geek Out About event. This is Geek Out About Computer Safety. This is our last event in this particular Geek Out About event series. We've talked about grilling. We've talked about taxes, which is more interesting than you might think. We've talked about planting trees, all kinds of different things. So if anyone has ideas about future topics too, you're welcome to email me at jcarney, C-A-R-N-E-Y, at cityofmarion.org. And I should have said this, but I'm Jessica Carney. I'm the event coordinator with the City of Marion. We might also go back to doing these events in person, which would be fun. And we can kind of broaden the topics when we do that as well. So today we're going to talk about both general computer safety for adults and dig in a little bit more specifically for kids' computer safety too. So with us today, we've got Terrell with the IT department with the City of Marion and Nick with the police department with the City of Marion. So I think Terrell is going to kick things off with a presentation. So I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Sounds good. Share my screen here. All right. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Excellent. So I thought I'd just get started and just talk about the scope of what we talk about when we talk about computer safety today and best practices. A lot of people just still kind of consider a computer to be a computer, typical laptop, desktop, but it really has a much bigger scope today. The general definition of a computer in its simplest form, as you can see here, is its ability to store, retrieve, and process data. So today that includes personal computers, but also tablets, smartphones, wearables like your wrist, smartwatches, and things like that. And the list is continually getting bigger and bigger all the time. So just wanted the tip to take away from this slide is that don't just think about computer safety as your standard old desktop computer. It's pretty much everything today. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about where we use our computer. So today, there's a lot more risk involved depending on exactly where we use our computer. And what I mean by where is more like where we navigate to, what we do on the internet, what services we consume. And then the risk is really involved in where we keep our financials and our personal data. So you might think about all the different accounts that we've created online over the years and what we store out there. So that's kind of the where. This slide, I wanted to kind of show some statistics on what we do in an internet minute. And it really kind of speaks more to the where as to, yeah, we sit behind a computer, we sit behind a tablet, we use our smartphone, but where does that actual happen? Where does those services happen? And where do we take any risks or store data, or especially personal data or financial data? And it's kind of interesting. You see a lot of social media on here, LinkedIn, and like text messages are included in that today. You may not realize it unless you get some of these text messages, but more and more, some of the hackers out there and the bad guys are starting to send these texts with malicious links to try to get you to click on them. So that's kind of in that scope too. And then, of course, you've got your media like YouTube, all the social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram. And then I think it's like 5,000 downloads from TikTok is on there. This one here is a kind of a key one to think about. $1.6 million, all the online shopping, because we do so much credit card transactions through the internet today. And this is basically where we create access to those services, where we've set up a username and a password, and we rely on that to protect our accounts. And then inside of each one of these elements, we store varying levels of data. And those varying levels of data kind of determine what risk we put out there. So if you followed any of the news and watched how things have played out, like particularly with like Facebook, where they've had breaches, if you store just your name and not too much else that's required on there, that risk is a lot lower than someone who may be sharing their first name, last name, date of birth, so everybody knows when your birthday is, your physical location where you live. The more information that gets breached that's usable by a hacker to then target you later is kind of determines your risk level. So when you talk about computer safety today, a lot of that involves what we do online, what we access. And then I thought I'd just talk about the when a little bit. And this comes to mind for me particularly because I've been on the internet for a long time. And I remember the days back when I would connect with a modem and it was a very slow connection back in the 90s and the 2000s, even before DSL and broadband became available. And back in those days, we connected up to a modem. It was very slow, but we only connected when we used it and we disconnected when we were done. So to a bad guy, to a hacker who wanted to get a hold of your data or break into your system, it limited their access. They were only able to really do anything when you were online. They may have got into your computer and installed something bad, but it didn't really have the capability to talk back out to them until you reconnected again. Today, it's a whole different story. Today, everything's connected online all the time and at much higher speeds. So what this means is that if you're being targeted, you've clicked on something accidentally, or there's some malware on your computer, you may not know it, but in the background, it may be running while you're sleeping because your computer, if you leave it on, is on all the time. But when you think about your other devices, your wearables and your smartphones and things like that, they're pretty much on all the time, and they are little computers. So just something to be mindful of, that we are in a different world today that's really increased the when of when we could be attacked, when we could have issues for computer safety and for particularly identity theft. So how can we improve on this and do this computing in a safer way? I always like to talk about behavior and behavior being key. And the reason I like to say that is because there's behavior that we can control and things, then there's that can help improve that. And there's also elements out there that we can't control. So I like to focus on the control. And the first thing that I always think about is what we call social engineering. This is basically the art of the scam. This is where you've received like a text message with a link like I talked about earlier that wants to open a browser. You've received an email. You've got something that's trying to tell you to change your behavior from what you were planning on doing. Take an action, click on something, tap an app, tap something on a device, and that triggers the next step that they want you to do. And the basic rule of thumb is if it sounds to be too good to be true, it probably is not true. Like this is an example from an email I just got last week in my junk folder, trying to get me to tell me I'm a lucky winner of $3.2 million from Western Union, West Africa continent, as a valued customer. So the bottom line is they want me to respond here. They want me to change my behavior. Click on this email right here and trigger the next step in the process of scamming me. Ultimately, what is their goal? It's always about money. So they want to get at something from you financially, whether it be small steps towards getting information about your identity that they can then sell and somebody else will use against you, or if they want to directly respond to you and try to get you to go a little further in their process.
Terrell, this is something I've wondered about.
Sure.
Do you have to panic if you opened an email like that on accident, or is it really the next step, like the link that's included or whatever is in the email? Obviously, you shouldn't click on that, but do you need to worry if you've just kind of absentmindedly opened a suspicious email?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not so much. I will say today, just looking at it in a view mode like this, like I did here to capture the screenshot, was pretty relatively safe. I will say this though, you have to be really careful. Like for me to capture the screenshot, my concern is I don't want to accidentally click on something. Mm-hmm. This one here is going to go, is what this would do is this would basically give me the option to reply to an email, and then I would actually have to click send. The one that's more dangerous is the one that goes a link like this, but that goes right to a web page. Mm-hmm. So that, yeah, but just viewing it's okay. Now in the future, I'm already starting to see some concerns where they're taking images in emails. So this email doesn't have any images in it, right? But quite often you see images that are downloaded. And depending on how you read your email, what software you use, whether it's web-based, like with Gmail or Microsoft's free email or another one, or if you use like a client software like Outlook or something like that, the settings in there dictate whether images are loaded automatically or if you have to be manually prompted to say, if I want to see the images on a page, I have to click something.
Yeah.
And the reason that's coming into play is because there's a new technology out there that the bad guys are using where they take an image like this and it's called pixel tracking. And what they've done is they got a little pixel in there, and as soon as it loads up, then instead of you actually clicking and replying to them, it's going to do that automatically and you won't even know it.
Oh.
And what that does is that tells them that they've got somebody that opened their email. because in a large campaign of spamming or phishing scams, what they're gonna do is they're not really targeting anybody specifically. They're just gonna blanket hit as many email addresses as they can. And then if you reply to this email or you get pixel tracked, then they're gonna know who actually opened the email. They have some live targets out there. Then that gives them a lot smaller scope to do more targeted scams. So initially, you're pretty much okay, but this is one of the things that I'm kind of just starting to follow that we want to watch out for is loading images up, because and the thing is, a lot of your emails today, if you don't load images up, you don't get much because a lot of the content is in images. So for me, the bottom line is if I have to actually load images to get something to do for someone I want to do business with, I probably won't do business with them. It's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So. And then the next slide I want to talk about was also connected to behavior, but this is more proactive versus reactive. So when you do click on something accidentally, what basically happens is it does a couple of things. If it's going to open up, if you're either going to reply to an email or you're going to click on an attachment or a link. If you're going to click on, if you accidentally click on an attachment or a link, what it's going to try to do is take you somewhere on the internet or automatically download a file to your computer. What it does then is it knows about the vulnerabilities that exist on computers, and it can find out right away without even knowing it what kind of computer you have, what kind of operating system you run, what kind of software you have. And it may have a payload in it immediately to take advantage of that, or it may just report back and say, okay, I got this person that clicked on this, they're running Windows 7 and it's been end of life by Microsoft and they're not doing security patches anymore, or it's running Windows 10, but it's missing some critical security patches. And I know what those are and I know how to exploit those. So by being proactive and just making sure that before you, and it kind of depends, I will say this, it kind of depends on your level of activity, because this is work, this takes time. If you're not one that uses the computer that much, I'm not saying don't patch, but if you're one that uses the computer a lot of web browsing, a lot of emails, then it's even more critical that you keep things up to date. Because if you do accidentally click on something, it's going to happen behind the scenes. You probably won't know about it. What they want most importantly is two tactics. They want to either not let you know they're there, and then they can inject software on your computer that it takes advantage of that vulnerability. And what we'll do then, we'll monitor your keystrokes or start to capture the sites that you do business with, try to capture your username and password. And then that's how identity theft happens. Or the second tactic generally is that they want to be totally in your face, some big pop-up window that says, hey, your computer's broken, click to fix now, or something that changes your behavior that way. Scare tactics to get you to click on it. But either way, by being proactive and not having those vulnerabilities on your computer at all, you reduce that risk immensely. So that's an important key. And the examples that I'm using here are with Windows computers or the operating system, but this also applies to other software on your computer, like if you use Microsoft Office, and I've got another slide coming up to talk about browsers, but it really talks about all software that can become vulnerable. And then also I wanted to point out that it's just not Windows devices, it's Apple devices too. For years, Apple liked to make a claim, or they'd like to be the claim to fame that they didn't get viruses and you didn't need to run virus software and antivirus software in those computers. But that's kind of changed over the years, especially with the release of Apple iPads and iPhones. Those have become a lot more vulnerable. So just to keep that in mind too. So when you get that notice on your smart device, whether it be Android or Apple, and it says, hey, there's a system update, that's it. A lot of times it'll say it's to help with stability issues or things like that. But there's also security patches in pretty much every one of those. So. And then I always say also, when it comes to keeping things updated, secure what is closest to the internet. So closest to the internet for us is generally email, web browsers, and apps. Anything that we do that connects to those services is the closest to that. And so all the major browsers today pretty much have automatic updates with them. So with Chrome, you'll see a little indicator at the top right that says restart now, update Chrome. And that's how that takes care of itself. So that's really important to also keep an eye on. And then I wanted to point out the Internet Explorer is now end of life by Microsoft, the old Internet Explorer. So if you're using that and you have an icon similar to this, you want to look to update your computer, and then they will automatically through Windows updates install the new Microsoft Edge. And that's important because they're no longer doing security updates on this one, but they've not made it possible to remove it from your computer. It's embedded in the operating system. So that is kind of a catch-22 that you'd like to remove it, but Microsoft won't let you, but it's insecure and I have to know not to use it. So that's a good point to keep in mind too when you're browsing the internet. This one is Safari, which comes with Apple computers, Firefox, Chrome, and this really should be replaced with that one. But those are the major browsers, and those are the ones that keep things most up to date. And of course, you have to talk about antivirus and anti-malware when you're talking about best practices for computer safety. Anti-malware was one of the newer terms, but it's really all the same kind of a thing, same kind of a product. Basically, Microsoft Windows will come with a new, it's been coming this way for years with what they call Defender. It's a very basic level antivirus, and it's great to have. You don't want to take it off, but does it do everything we need today? Unless you're doing almost next to nothing on a computer, not really. It does do signature updates so that it knows about the latest malware, but it's a little slower to do that than the stuff you pay for. So it's kind of one of those stories where you get what you pay for. If it doesn't cost anything, there's really no guarantees of how effective it is. So there's a lot of good brands of software out there. I always say I can't recommend one specifically. There's a lot of great ones, but I always just say go to the internet to a trustworthy site or go to Google, but be very careful and search highest rated antivirus 2021. That's kind of how I look for software. But I always want to be very careful. I'm not looking at the very first few results that are like ad driven. You want to find a good reputable source out there that's a company that does reviews regularly and get their opinion of what they do. And then just a little bit back to services online. This is one of the things that's starting to become a problem for people who've been on the internet for a long time is account management. We may have created a MySpace account back in the early 2000s and forgot about it. And it may have some personal information there that we shared that we forgot we shared. So keeping track of all those old accounts and just removing them if you're not going to use them just really limits the scope of attack that someone that's looking to target you could have. A lot of us today use a lot of the stuff like Netflix and the streaming services, and they had a pretty good breach, 2018, I believe, where they collected data on personal information on, I want to say it was millions of people. So, be cognizant of what's going on in the news and make sure that you know that if you do hear a breach for an account you use, what was it that got shared out? And just know that if there is a breach to account you use, then you want to be really prepared for the next several months, maybe 2 or 3 years, because that's when that clock starts ticking and when somebody's going to get a hold of that and start using it to try to target you for identity theft. And then I always say limit the information. If they don't require it, maybe you don't need to put it out there. Just because there's a form field that asks for 10 different pieces of information about you to have an account with them, most of the time only part of that is like really required. So always ask yourself, what do they really need for me to do business with them? And then, like I said, beware of those future scam emails, especially if your account's been hacked somewhere and you know about that. I just had a recent email from PayPal to tell me that I needed to update my password. It had been a while. And I was like, this is probably another scam. But you know what? It did look very legit. I couldn't find anything in the email as a red flag. So best practice there is they provided a link. I don't click on that link. I open a new browser tab. I go to paypal.com and I inspect my account manually. If there's a real reason I need to do something with my account by logging into that account, essentially contacting that account directly versus through the email that I got, it'll tell me. And in this case, it was legit. I did need to update my password. It had been 18 months, and they are starting to have a little more proactive review of their customers and trying to keep them more secure. So it was kind of a refreshing experience not to be trying to be hacked that time.
Yeah, that was a good tip, Terrell. I feel like sometimes, you might get suspicious emails too from, or it might look suspicious from your bank. And I don't know about you, but I can't remember like my bank's phone number off the top of my head. So instead of going off the one in the email, I always try to Google the actual phone number of the bank and then call that one.
Yeah, exactly. And then just a little bit about account takeover tactics. So speaking of banks, this was one I got in my junk mail last week as well. And my junk mail, I use Microsoft's email service, and their junk mail filter's gotten a lot better over the years, and it flagged a few things in this email. And it gives me the opportunity to say, okay, yeah, this is legit. I can claim it as not junk, but I don't do any business with Citizens Bank. And so I took a look at this one. I thought, hey, this might be a great example for this presentation. So what they're basically trying to get me to do is click on this link right here to fix an issue. It's one of those behavior things I talked about before. And what I want to do is then really geek out on this one. So I don't expect anybody to understand this, but what happens in the background is when you have an email service that's doing some security filtering, you don't see it, but in the back end, it's looking at those elements of that email that are behind the scenes, and it's doing some analysis, and then it's determining if it should go to junk email or your inbox, or maybe remove it altogether from your view, depending on the service that you have and how aggressive it is. So in this case, I had, and this is just a little bit of my manual analysis, is I've got an email source address that I don't recognize, and Citizens Bank Online, because I don't do business with them. And I also don't want to assume that that's their legit address. It could just be citizensbank.com. I don't know. I don't do business with them. If I did do business with them, I would want to make sure I did like we talked about earlier, and not clicked on that link, but went directly to the website and found out. In this case, there's a new, it's called Sender Policy Framework. It's a security feature. And it basically takes a look at that address and tries to detect if it's the same address as a legit company, basically. And in this case, it failed. It said authentication results, SPF fail. So it recognizes the IP address, which is it's like think of a postal address, but for the internet, how things get routed across the world. And it basically said to my spam filter that, nope, doesn't pass the test. And then it's handed off to the next test, which is called DKIM, or Domain Keys Identified Mail. And this is just another way to check that source email address to see if it's legit or not. It failed on that one as well. And then basically what it said was it failed because domain of citizensbankonline.com is not a permitted sender from what they know of Citizens Bank. And the other red flag that I wanted to call out here is it's coming from this would be the email server it's coming from. And it's got this .au, which is, I believe, Australia. And maybe they do have a server in Australia, but I always question that because most of the banking that I do is in the United States. So when there's a foreign address in there, it's just a little bit of a red flag to me to think about. And a lot of this is mostly behind the scenes, so you really don't see this stuff. But bottom line is, this is what you see, and this is what's behind there. So this went to my junk mail, and I was glad that it did. But I thought it would be a good example because even when we look at things in our junk mail, sometimes things goes there that are legit, and it is a trusted email, and we need to move it back to our inbox, and we actually want to interact on that. So our perception of what's in our junk box is that we do take caution with that generally, but we also know legit stuff goes there. So there could be something in there that I really actually need to have. So no matter where it ends up, I don't trust my spam filter 100%, but so I need to take all the precautions that I talked about earlier and make sure that I go to my bank directly and don't click on links. But this was kind of just a way to kind of really dig in behind the scenes and see what happens with junk mail filters and spam filters. And then this slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about web browsing because it can be very dangerous. I've seen this for years and years and years. When I got into internet back in the 90s, there was a lot less pictures and a lot less graphical images. So I'm not saying that you didn't need to be careful, but today things have changed drastically to where when you open a web browser and go to like a very legit website like msn.com, yahoo.com, what you end up with is the main content that they want to show you, and then you have advertisement space. And those are designed to trick you into getting off of that main site over to this article. In this case, it's a celebrity article. I mean, they've got things in there that just want to change your behavior, want to get you to, hey, I want to know more about this mom's hilarious video captures, but what you may not know is that this content is being presented to you through that legit website from a complete different third party. And those third party sources have been known to have been breached by the bad guys. And then they replace or add to their content malicious code. So then you click on that because you're just harmlessly wanting to learn a little more about this story because it sounds interesting and you don't realize it, but you've actually just went off of MSN or off of a legit site to a third-party site that may have been breached. So it's just kind of been one of those things over the years that ends up with adware on your computer, and worse. So, and then you can't talk about computer safety without talking a little bit about passwords and how to manage them. And one of the things that I like to, I mean, everybody has had passwords over the years. This isn't a new topic, but one of the things I like to always tell people is don't think of it as a password because passwords are difficult. And today we need to have passwords different for everything else. I always like to think of it as a passphrase. It helps me memorize it better, but it also forces me to make it a little more complex when I build a password out. So this is a little longer than 12 characters, but I thought it might be a good way to show that you can take a password, convert it to a passphrase, capitalize the first letters, add a number, add a special character, and automatically have a very secure password. And it wasn't that hard. So complexity, when they talk about complexity, they're always talking about the combination of uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. And the reason why is because most of your attacks on passwords are based on dictionary words. Well, this is a combination of dictionary words. And from a computer's point of view, it doesn't see the letters, it sees characters in computer language. And because uppercase and lowercase are separated out into a different character set from a computer hacker's perspective, it makes it a little trickier than if it's a lowercase PASS, for example. So that adds a little bit to the complexity. And then you definitely don't want to, today's world, if you have your Netflix account set up with the same password as all your other accounts and Netflix gets breached like it did in 2018, then they've just automatically got all your passwords. The other big thing is to try to use two-factor authentication when possible. You're seeing more and more sites do this. It started more with the banking and the healthcare industry. You're starting to see text me a code or set up an authentication method that shows that not only do I have a password, but I have something else to prove my identity before I get access to that site. So you're seeing it a lot more, and I think you're going to see more of it being required, not just optional at sites too. And then the last thing is to consider a password manager. If you don't have a lot of passwords and you can keep your password secure, somewhere on a piece of paper, I wouldn't keep it close to your computer, but somewhere on a piece of paper, locked up or secure, that works. But for me, I have a lot of passwords. So I use a password manager that's in the cloud. And then I use two-factor authentication with that, because if anybody would be able to breach that, they would have all my passwords. So having that proof of identity, two different ways to get into that account, secures that as well. And that's the end of my set of slides.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't see any questions in the little box right at the moment, so we'll just jump right over to Nick. But do feel free to, if you think of any more based on what Terrell said, just go ahead and pop them in there, and we'll come back to them.
Okay. Make sure. Is that sharing okay?
Looks good.
Oh, sorry, it's muted. Yep.
All right. I'm just going to talk about basic internet safety. I've been with the department for about 10 years now. In the last 3 I've been in investigations, and I've just kind of focused on a lot of cyber type crimes. It seems like that's just kind of the way that things are going nowadays. I'm part of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, where we focus on exploited kids and just how the internet is used to victimize children and other vulnerable people. So this presentation is kind of focused on that. First off, when you think of how you get online, like Terrell said, everything. If you ever hear the phrase the Internet of Things, that just refers to everything that connects to the internet. Right now, if you go into someone's house, you can have a computer, cell phone, game console, an e-reader, a tablet, light bulbs are all connected to the internet. And so there's all those different ways for people to be victimized. Safety and security issues on the internet. Obviously, there's inappropriate content. It is the Wild West. you can connect to anybody anywhere, and you have no idea who that person or people are. Privacy is big, especially now we're seeing a big push in like cell phones, where they used to track what's called an advertising identifier. So that's how you got all your personalized ads, where Facebook would, you'd think about buying a grill, and then the next thing you know, there's 10 ads for grills. Well, that's how they track you. Now they're really trying to limit that, which I think is good, but they always come up with something else, some other way to track you, because that's how they make their money. And so they want to make money. Sexting is always awkward to talk about, but it happens, and we just want to educate people. Not so much, my whole objective is not to go arrest a bunch of people. It's just to educate them, because if you forget about the legal versus illegal, there's a lot more bad stuff that can happen to you that have nothing to do with the cops. So we just want people to be safe when they're online. Online enticement. Talk about one case where it was in Marion, where we had some enticement, and this person had no idea who the suspect was, thought it was someone completely different. So it's crazy how quickly those things can change. And then cyberbullying is always an issue. It gets a little blown out of proportion in the media, but it is a big concern. So when you talk to your kids, you always want to, it depends on how old they are, what you share with them. So younger children, you always want to start out with, we call it netiquette. So just what you should be doing online. Give them a good foundation on what to do on a computer, when to do it, and what to report and who to report it to. And then once your kids get older, you can talk to them about cyberbullying, sexting, what they post online, and then even meeting with someone offline. But when we talk about inappropriate content, obviously we're talking about pornography, excessive violence, hate speech, and any kind of risky or illegal behavior. No matter how long I do this job, it always amazes me what people will put, not just on the internet, but on their own Snapchat, Facebook pages. It just amazes me. And so all that stuff is out there for whoever wants to see it. And so you just have to really be careful with what you access and what your kids access. When your kid or someone else has seen something that is inappropriate, it can really have negative effects on kind of their mindset, just because a lot of younger kids may not know what they're looking at. They could be guilty or feel guilty or ashamed just because, again, they don't know what they're looking at. And so they may think that they accidentally click on something. Well, now they're looking at it and they think they're going to get in trouble. And so you always want to be careful with how you talk to them. It's the internet is a great tool. It's essential, especially in the last year. You have to have the internet nowadays. So it shouldn't be scary, but you should be aware of the risks associated with it. If your kids do come across something that is inappropriate, or if they accidentally click on something, someone sends them something, they can just turn off the screen. They're probably going to be accessing it on their phones. Every phone has a button that you click and it shuts the screen off. Hit the back button. If you're on the internet, you hit the back button, then just go back to whatever website you're looking at. And if the back button doesn't work for whatever reason, just close the browser. And at least they won't be looking at it anymore. And then we always encourage them to tell a trusted adult, whether it be like an older brother, parent, grandparent, really anybody that they trust, to ask questions or ask them what they should do. And most websites nowadays, like Facebook, Snapchat, all social media, they have ways to report accounts. You can report it to them and they do their own little investigation, and they may ban the account. That's really up to them. And then there's also this cybertipline.org. It was set up by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And what that is, people can report suspicious content on the internet, and then the cyber tip line will make tips and then send those out. So every now and then, like I'll get some being part of the Crimes Against Children Task Force. We get those tips and then we follow up on them to see, is this actually happening in Marion? Is it just kind of going through the internet and kind of making a stop in Marion and then going somewhere else? So we always look into that. But that is one place where you can go to report anything, and they follow up on everything. So in addition to talking to kids about what to do if they see inappropriate things on the internet, you also want to talk to them about what they are posting. Like I said, people post some stupid stuff. And the thing with the internet is, and usually see it when someone tweets something that they shouldn't. Some celebrity will tweet something offensive, or just something that people don't like. Well, even if you delete that, somebody has access to it. That picture, video, tweet, TikTok dance, whatever you post out there, you can really never delete it. So it's always out there. So that's why you have to be especially careful with what you put online, especially when if someone is angry and makes a threat. We've had that quite a bit, where someone posts something in the heat of the moment that they don't believe, but it's threatening towards one person or group of people. Well, as police officers, we react pretty strongly to that because we don't want anyone to get hurt. So we kind of go into high gear, and then eventually, down the road, find out that it was a heat of the moment kind of thing. But before that, we never really know. So it's kind of a dangerous situation. So what can you do with your kids? Set ground rules. You want to give them guidelines, what kind of types of sites they should go to, what apps they should download, and when they even have access to electronics. You may want to just give them a kind of a blackout period, as they call it, where they don't have their phone, tablet, whatever. Make them go outside, make them build something in the house, just to set those ground rules. You can't really limit what they do on the internet, which is kind of the scary thing, is no matter what kind of software you put on your phone or tablet, kids find ways around it. It's pretty amazing. The schools, they have software that blocks certain websites that kids, go to. Well, they find ways to access them, and it's pretty easy, because usually all you have to do is go to Google and say, hey, how do I get around this software? And someone in the world has figured it out, and so they post step-by-step instructions. So that's why education is so important, just teaching them what to do and what not to do online. You always want to research before you buy. So if you're thinking about buying a tablet, or like a reader tablet, whatever you are buying, make sure you know what it can do and exactly what it can connect to, what your kid could do on it. Not saying that they will, but just look at the capabilities of that. Because if something can take a picture, well, then that means that they can post that picture. And so you just want to be careful with what you're buying. There are monitoring softwares out there where you can engage with your kids. And just like with the virus protection software Tara was talking about, you can Google, there's thousands of them, but none of them are foolproof. Some may say, we'll send you copies of your kids' text messages. Well, when they send a message through Facebook or Snapchat, it's technically not a text message, so it's not going to show you that. And so there's no software that can catch everything. So just be aware of what something can do, and then be aware, if you do install some of that software on your kid's phone, know what it can and can't do. When you talk to kids about privacy on the internet, especially younger kids, any kids, they love to take pictures and post pictures. They want pictures of their friends. They want pictures if they go to a high school dance, whatever they're doing. But just be careful with what they're posting, because the good hackers, and I say hackers because they're really just tricksters, they will strike up conversation and they'll be able to piece together people's lives to figure out where they live, figure out, their passwords. They'll be talking to you, and they ask you certain questions that a kid doesn't realize are suspicious, but really what they're trying to do is trying to get your password. And so that can happen really anywhere that you can talk to someone, whether it be in a game, just on Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. Someone can try and steal your info. Obviously, take kids, don't give out their passwords, don't give out their address, where they're currently at, and then phone numbers and email addresses, because all of those things can be used to steal their information. And some of those risks, the biggest one with kids is actually identity theft, because you're not going to know that your child's identity was stolen. If they're 8 years old, you're not going to know that their identity was compromised for probably 9 or 10 years, because when you go to apply for a credit card, or they go to apply for a credit card, that's when it's going to pop up and say, hey, you have all this debt. And then by that point, you can get it fixed, but it's incredibly difficult, and it will take months of paperwork to fix all that through all the different government agencies, and it's just paperwork on paperwork on paperwork. So that's why we want them to be especially careful with what they're doing there. Obviously, scams are a big thing. I got an email from PayPal the other day also, and it was actually PayPie, so they didn't even spell it right. But with those emails, a lot of times the grammar will be terrible. Right now, I think I've had 4 or 5 cases this year that we've tracked back to Nigeria, and that's people just sending fake emails out and saying, hey, you won $1 million, but I need you to send me $1,000 for the shipping costs. Well, it doesn't cost $1,000 to wire transfer any money, and no one's going to contact you and say, hey, here's $1 million. As good as that would be. So Nigeria and actually Australia seem to be kind of the hubs for all these financial crimes for whatever reason. But they're out of the country, and so if we were to get a court order or search warrant, whatever, it's up to that country whether or not they want to even honor it. Most of the time they don't, because they're not, they don't have to pay attention to the United States law. They can do their own thing, and especially in Nigeria, there's really not many laws anyways, so there's really nothing we can do once someone steals all your info. We talk about hacking. Hacking is a real thing, but when you see something online where someone says, oh, I got hacked, my account got hacked, no, it didn't. Someone guessed your password, or you gave them your password, and they accessed your account. The actual hacking that you see in movies, it happens, but it doesn't look like that, and it's pretty rare. So again, just be careful with what passwords we're sending out. Online enticement, obviously with society moving to the internet, this was not really a thing 20 years ago. It is now. So whatever apps, sites that your kids go to, there's someone on that site that's going to try and entice them for something. The case that we had, it was a couple of years ago, there was a guy that got the names of a bunch of students at Marion High School, and he made fake Snapchat accounts with all those names. So he had probably 20 or 25 different accounts with actual student names, and he would message other students in the school and basically ask them for nude photographs. And a couple people actually sent them, and then he wanted to keep talking to them. And when they said, you know what, I'm done with this, then he said, okay, well, if you don't do whatever I say, I'm going to send these to the rest of the school. So obviously that is not good. We ended up tracing that guy back. He lived just west of Des Moines, and he ended up going to prison for all that. But just be careful, because even if you think you're talking to your friends on the internet, you may not be. You could be talking to a complete stranger, and you have no idea. So what can you do about all this? Again, education is the big part. If kids know what can happen, then they can start to make their own decisions as they get older on what they do. Learn about what you can report and how to report it. Like I said, most sites have something that will say, report this account, report this user, whatever it may be. But most of them have that. Help them set up privacy settings. So your Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, they all have privacy settings where you can select who can and can't see your account. Passwords, again, big thing, like Terrell said, make a good password. Don't use the same password for everything, which is a pain in the butt because it's easy to remember one password. You don't want to remember 20. That's why you should get something that keeps all your passwords and keeps them safe so that you don't lose them. Sexting is always, I would say it's popular. A lot of people do it. Obviously it's not good. It's illegal, but when I talk to most kids about it, they're not very concerned with it. And really the legal aspect of it is the last thing you should be concerned about, because once these photos are out there, you can't get them back. It's not like you can just go to one person and say, hey, delete that photo. Every year we get probably 2 or 3 cases from either Marion or Linn-Mar High School where someone starts dating a person and then they break up, or they send nude photographs back and forth, then they break up. Then one of them says, okay, well, I don't like you anymore. I'm going to send your photo to all my friends. And then those friends send it to a bunch of other people, and tracing every single person that got that photo is very difficult and time consuming. And, it just keeps getting shared and shared and shared. So once the photo's out there, there's not a ton that we can do about it. And that's why we want to educate people. So maybe before they send that photo, they think, you know what, I don't want this on the internet, so I'm just not going to do this. And we talk about why do kids do this? Sometimes it's to be funny. Sometimes they have a crush on someone. Sometimes someone may threaten them, or they're just experimenting. Kids, especially once they get into high school, they are growing up, they're making their own decisions, and they're learning what to do, what not to do. And so it's always a risky age, but I think as long as we educate them on the dangers of it, you can't really stop what they're going to do, but you can try and inform them, and hopefully that they'll make the best decision. The consequences of that. Number one, humiliation. Because when you send someone a photo thinking that they're going to keep it private, and then they send that to a bunch of other people, well, that's going to open you up to all kinds of judgment and humiliation, bullying. We've seen quite a bit of blackmail from it. People on Facebook, they will ask for photographs, and then someone will send them, and then they say, okay, you're going to give me a bunch of money, or I'm going to send this to everybody on your friend list. Well, they do it because they're afraid of everyone seeing them naked or whatever. Obviously, there's school discipline involved if they're doing this in the school, and then the police can get involved. Like I said, that is usually the last thing that people worry about. There are some very severe consequences. Like I said, that one guy that we tracked out by Des Moines, he had, I think, 5 photographs, and he went to prison for 10 to 12 years. So pretty severe consequences, but it's nothing in comparison to kind of the social punishment that happens with it. When you talk about it, yes, it's super awkward. I've given this presentation or one like it to middle schools, high schools, and everybody always chuckles when we talk about it because it's super awkward to talk about, especially with the police. But we do need to educate the kids and tell them what can happen. You want to make sure if they do receive a picture of someone, don't forward it to everyone else, because if you receive it, yes, it's illegal to have that picture, but you don't want to be part of the problem. You don't want to, further that criminal activity or whatever. So you just want to be really, really careful, and then talk to them about what a healthy relationship is. If someone's pressuring them into sending nude photographs, that's not healthy. That's just someone who wants to take advantage. When kids get solicited online, most of the time it happens on social network sites. Like I said, it'll be by older people, sometimes by their peers. They may make fake accounts. The problem with the accounts is you can report one account. So if someone's using their account to do things they shouldn't be doing, you can report it, but then all they have to do is sign up another one, and it takes about 30 seconds. And so that's why, when we do investigations, if I download someone's cell phone, they'll have 15 Facebook accounts, because they may forget their password and say, you know what, it's easier to set up a new account than it is to reset my password. So they just keep making new ones. And a lot of people, because they just aren't bothered by it. I think they're desensitized to these pictures floating around school and what they see on the internet, in the media, everywhere. They don't really understand sexting is a big problem, and it leads to much bigger things. And unfortunately, a lot of times they don't realize that until it's too late. So when kids are online, we call it suspects will groom them. They will exploit their natural curiosity. They'll start a online relationship, and then they will kind of get to know them. And nowadays, you can talk to a high school kid. They'll be talking for 30 minutes, and they think that they know you. It's just amazing. 15, 20 years ago, you'd have to know someone for years to really trust them. Now you can go online, strike up a conversation with someone, and they trust you in 30 minutes. And so that's one of the problems with this is offenders will groom children, and they may buy them gifts. They may get them a cell phone. They say, don't tell your parents about this cell phone. They may give them gift cards to say, you know what, this is our secret. And then eventually they'll say, you know what, let's meet somewhere. And you never know what's going to happen. And that's why if we educate your kids about the dangers of this, they'll see some of these red flags when someone says, hey, here's a gift card, let's go get coffee sometime. That doesn't happen. People don't just give you gift cards online for no reason. So again, check if they're receiving gifts. If you see them calling numbers that you don't know that may be out of the area, if they're rejecting family and friends and want to spend more time online. I think that's part of growing up, where teenagers don't want to be around their parents, they don't want to be around their families, they want to be with their friends. But if that is getting to the extreme where they have to be online, it's kind of a red flag. It's not always a grooming incident, but it could be. And then minimize, if they minimize the screen when you're around. If they're trying to hide what they're doing online, there's a reason. And it could be that they're just trying to find your next Christmas present, but it could also be something that you need to be concerned about. So what can you do? Talk to your child about relationships. Talk to them about what a healthy relationship is, and make sure that they can come to you with any questions. Because if they don't feel like they can go to you, they won't. They're not going to ask you, the tough questions. They're not going to talk to you about what they're seeing online. They may go to their friends, and their friends have good intentions, but may not always know what's best because they're kind of going through the same thing. Talk to them about meeting offline. Never ever meet someone offline that you met on the internet. Like you may be talking to them, and there's a show on MTV called Catfish, and it's amazing to me. People will have a year-long relationship online and then agree to meet this person, and when they meet, the person is completely different. It's not even close. It's because they've been lied to for a year. And so you never know. I could start chatting with who I think is Terrell, and I may not even be chatting with him. It could be some other person that's stealing his name to try and get something from me. So never ever meet with someone that you have met on the internet. Show your kids all the warning signs. If they know what the red flags are, they may not pick up on one just because they don't really know what they're doing. But if you're educating them well, they're going to say, hey, and this is my parents told me this is this isn't making sense. I'm going to tell someone about this. I'm going to tell adult, police, teacher, whoever. But just make sure that they know what all those red flags are. Kids are very capable. And so this little chat was actually taken from one of the cyber tips that was received. And this is pretty typical. You'll see this where someone says, ask if they want to trade pictures. And this kid in here responded great. Said they get a photo sent to them and they say, "You're gross, bye, see you later." And those are usually pretty funny when we come across those. But at the same time, there's some others that go the other direction. But obviously the kid in this one is pretty well educated and not interested in whatever this pervert on the other end is trying to do. So if you ever have any issues, you can report it to the cyber tip line, and it's just cybertipline.org. Anyone that sends those photographs, anyone who asks your children to send those images, if they're talking in a sexual manner to your child, or if they ask your child to meet in person, you can report that, and everything gets followed up on. Even if maybe something that starts, say, in Marion. I just had one a couple weeks ago where it started in Marion and I ended up tracing it to Texas. So then I just forwarded it down to officers in Texas and they kind of continue the investigation. So it definitely gets followed up on. But the tough part is a lot of times these investigations just take a little bit of time because you have to go through all the different internet providers and apps, and sometimes they're kind of a pain to work with, but eventually we get it done. All right, so then options for you, you can install the filtering and monitoring software, but again, there's nothing out there that is 100%. So there's always going to be some vulnerabilities or gaps in what that software provides. But as long as you know what those gaps are, you can figure out, where you might be exposed and what else you can do to help out. Your cell phone provider can limit some stuff. Nowadays, it's less just because a lot of the content on phones is actually now cloud-based. So the cell phone providers just don't have as much info. Research options for other mobile devices. Most of them nowadays, once they connect to the internet, they can go anywhere. So just be careful with what you buy and what your kids are downloading. And then look at the built-in security features. If you're using like Google to browse the internet versus some obscure internet browser you download off something else, you want to use a reputable company, but that's up to you. You can Google different companies to use, but just be careful which web browser you're using. And then the main thing, if you don't take anything from this, just remember this: technology can't catch everything. So the biggest thing is to communicate and then educate kids, because the internet it's a wonderful place, but it's also terrifying at the same time. And you want to make sure that when your kids do get on the internet, that they're doing it in a safe way. So that is the end. My contact info is on the bottom. Obviously, you can report anything that is suspicious to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or shoot me an email and we will follow up on it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. That was super helpful. Just two quick questions before I let you guys go. So this is probably for kids or adults. What do you think about the services that advertise to comb the internet for your name and address and delete them? If you know what I mean, like, do you recommend using those for kids, for adults? What do you think about those?
Some of those are just a bunch of crap, because they will just do a generic search. But really, I think, let me see if I can pull it up here really quick, because someone else had just asked me about that. The government actually just put out some guidelines. The biggest thing is, at least that I found that helps. So I have two email addresses that I use in my personal life. One of them I use, so when I buy something, I use that email address, because if I buy something from Home Depot, Well, Home Depot is going to sell my email address to someone else, so they make money. And so when I get all the spam, it goes to that one email address. I don't care about it. I don't monitor that. And I found that that helps a lot. But then the other stuff, it's just limiting what you put into certain forms, like Tara was talking about. You know, if they ask you your name, address, favorite color, what kind of car you have, usually only like one of those things is going to be required. Just fill in the required stuff. They don't need any of the other stuff, because then it's just something that they can sell and make money themselves.
That makes sense. Yeah, just go full Ron Swanson and just don't let anyone have your address, if you know
Yep.
the reference I'm making. Okay, Terrell, I think this question is more for you. I've seen many commercials that claim VPNs make it safer to surf the web, but it doesn't seem like that would make it safer from malicious files. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, and that is correct. It's not going to stop those malicious files coming through. What the VPN does, it stands for Virtual Private Network. And what it does is it connects you through a service and encrypts everything you do instead of just part of what you do. So when you shop online, log into a bank, your credentials, your username and password are encrypted, and what you do is encrypted. However, when you first browse to that before you log in, that is usually not. And so and then all the advertisements that come from everywhere else quite often aren't. What a VPN does is it basically encrypts everything, and it's more for privacy. But it's not going to stop you from clicking on something and bringing anything through that encrypted tunnel back down to your computer. So that's correct.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions we had. So if anyone thinks of additional questions right after we log off, I'll just give my email one more time. I can get them to the right place. I know, Nick, you put yours up too, but mine is jcarney, CARNEY @cityofmarion.org. And thanks to both of you guys so much for your time and for all that helpful information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.